Welcome. My name is Emily Blum, and I'm the Executive Director of Disability Lead. We are so glad you can join us today. My pronouns are she, her, and an image description of me for those who may be blind or low vision is that I am a white woman with brown shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses, and I'm sitting in a pretty bare bones office today. We sent out a guide on how to access key accessibility features in Zoom, including CART or captions in ASL. If you have any questions or issues during the program, please reach out. My colleagues are monitoring the chat and will help troubleshoot any issue. This afternoon, we are so pleased to welcome you to our first ever storytelling event. And we have 4 incredible and talented disabled leaders, all of whom are part of our 2023 Institute, Disability Lead's annual program for emerging leaders. Amy, Kruti, Gizelle, and Brittney are going to share their stories with you. These are all intimate, beautiful, and connected stories, and I'm so honored that they are sharing them today. All 4 stories touch on themes of seeking diagnoses, building community, combating ableism, and how each of them innovated solutions to problems society put in front of them as disabled people. These 4 stories are wholly distinct, yet inextricably connected. And that's because stories of disabled people, though they may not be widely told or known, are universal. They are human, and they connect all of us, those who identify as disabled and those who do not. Last year, I participated in a fellowship supported by an organization called Citizen University. CU's mission is to strengthen civic culture in our democracy. And throughout that fellowship, we talked about what ails modern society. And for me, I kept returning to a notion of lack of civic friendship. And not to get too academic, and believe me, it's not often that I reference Aristotle, yet he defined the various types of friendship as they relate and connect to our politics in person. The first is a relationship based on usefulness. The second thrives on the delight or enjoyment of being in another's company. The third, and what I challenge each of you today to actively seek out, is civic friendship, the kind that requires a commitment to the other person's good and a shared understanding of what that good is. Today, that commitment to others' good is fundamentally missing. Our news and social media are too often ugly and feed hate and cruelty. It's present in both our politics and our everyday lives. You joined us today not to necessarily fix what ails us, but to listen to stories of humanity and expand shared understandings. You joined us to support Amy, Kruti, Gizelle, and Brittney because they are your friends, colleagues, or loved ones. Maybe they are total strangers, but you're interested in hearing their ideas and the journeys they've endured. Simply put, today's gathering is about holding people you don't know in your heart, making room for their voices and their needs. Truly, it's the only way we will achieve the equitable and inclusive communities each of us yearns for. It's what's required of us as compassionate and caring citizens of this world. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that next week marks the 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the historic civil rights law that protects the rights of disabled people. As we celebrate all that the law has provided, we are still realistic enough to know that much more needs to be done if our community and everyone in it is to achieve true equity. At Disability Lead, we believe that change will come as disabled leaders have greater power and influence at decision-making tables. Our 4 great speakers today, and many more both in Chicago and across the country, are leading the way. And with that, our stories. I'd first like to welcome Amy Johnson to share. Amy talks about finding her diagnosis later in life and the need to figure out how she should show up at work as a result. To disclose or not to disclose, that is a question at the heart of Amy's and many of our collective journeys. Amy talks about the power that is possible when showing up proudly with one's disability identity and a desire to make a change. Welcome, Amy.
Hello. My name is Amy Johnson, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a pale white woman with red curly hair and an orange top. I'm in my home office with plants and a very colorful background. I have a lot to say, but I can't always find the words. Sometimes I can work for hours without stopping, and other times I'm easily distracted. I will go above and beyond your expectations, but can burn out sometimes. I will be honest about how I feel about something, but I won't look you in the eyes. I have some superhero problem-solving skills, yet I have a few sensory sensitivities that make life difficult. I can paint fantastical scenes from memory, but have trouble recalling what was said in that last meeting. I am many things: a designer, a wife, a painter, a dog mom, and apparently I'm also autistic. I went on for years not quite understanding what was in my head, and sometimes I wasn't able to cope with a typical job environment. I went to doctors on and off, but never really got answers that fit. There were many times working 8 hours in a bright, loud, open office sent me in the spiral. I've gotten evaluations saying that I talk over people and that I don't show enough gratitude. There was one time I wasn't hired for a contract position, and I received a list of all the reasons why I wasn't a good fit for the company. They said that my facial expressions were odd or inappropriate when surprised or stressed, that I was way too intense, and that I went off topic too often with clients. In 2016, the political climate in the US had me in crisis. It was to a point that the bigness of worldly issues, in addition to the personal ones I've always had, were affecting how I showed up at my job. I restarted my mental health journey at that point to get to the bottom of what was causing my difficulties at work. That was the year that someone finally suggested something that I hadn't heard of before, that I may be autistic. Yeah, I know what that can bring to mind. Trust me, I've heard the stereotypes and cliches. I've heard that people would never know that I'm autistic. I've heard people say they feel sorry for me. I've had people treat me differently or convince themselves that everyone is a little autistic. All of these phrases devalue my mental health needs. They make something that is very big in my life smaller and more digestible for them. In reality, autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder on a nonlinear spectrum. It's characterized by difficulties in social interaction, communication, and repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. It also sometimes comes with sensory sensitivities, such as sensitivities to light, sounds, tastes, and textures. I personally have extreme reactions to bright lights and loud noises, which give me massive headaches or even make me nauseous. Some autistic people have trouble with clothing textures or different foods. And if an autistic person reaches their social or sensory limit for the day, they might be sent into sensory overload, which could lead to meltdowns. Autistic people also sometimes avoid eye contact and have intense special interests or STEM. And stemming is a form of sensory comfort involving repetitive actions like rocking back and forth, flapping hands, looking at flickering lights, or even smelling certain smells. For the longest time, I wondered why people were so resistant to believing I was autistic when I revealed it, especially because I'm late diagnosed. In recent years, it has become very clear to me that the reason is rooted in the original development of the diagnosis. You see, I identify as female, and autism diagnoses are male-dominated at this point in history. You don't hear about women being on the spectrum very often because the original ASD diagnosis was developed around young boys and how they behaved. People who identify as female are much harder to diagnose because we behave differently and are better at masking or disguising our true nature by mimicking others. We just blend in better. A lot of autistic women are actually going undiagnosed until their 30s or never get diagnosed at all. And this is a problem because it means a lot of autistic women don't get the resources they need earlier in life to be successful later in life. This is both in their professional and personal lives. When I first found out that I was autistic, I didn't believe them. I mean, I was 27? Surely someone would have told me at any point in my life. And believe me, those same extreme stereotypes we've all heard, I've definitely heard them. And they filled me with misconceptions about what autism was, and it made me afraid that I might lose my job if anybody found out. This cliched image of autistic people that society has in its head has made companies worry that we aren't capable of producing meaningful work and value. But in reality, a study run by the Harvard Business Review says people on the spectrum are actually 20% more productive than their neurotypical peers, especially if they're given the right environment and right opportunities. You see, nothing actually was changing in my life. I was still me, just atypically labeled. This diagnosis was a good thing. It meant I knew what I needed to bring my best self to work, and it helped me value my mental health above all else. I found that I would not be losing my job. In fact, I gained the respect from my coworkers for coming out and verbalizing what I needed to communicate better. Being on the autism spectrum doesn't make me a worse teammate, and it doesn't mean I'm unable to do my job. It simply means that I'm a different teammate, and I have different ways of communicating. I learned that I needed noise-canceling headphones to avoid distraction and tune out white noise that was pumped into the speakers in my office. I needed bulleted lists and action items at the end of every meeting and email because I work best with digestible chunks of information and am very task-oriented. I allowed myself to take more breaks and took advantage of our company's wellness rooms whenever I felt sensory overload. And more recently, I learned that I thrive in a work-from-home environment. You see, COVID work-from-home protocols really helped my job performance because they stripped away the social barriers I had in a traditional office environment, and I didn't get distracted as often, and I didn't burn out halfway through the day because of human interaction. I also learned that the reason I'm so good at what I do is because I think in shapes, colors, and patterns. I'm great at using common visual elements to create logical user experiences for my job. And puzzles don't faze me because solving problems is my strength. When I'm passionate about something, I can hyper-focus and move mountains. My journey has taught me that I hack the world around me to suit my needs, and it makes me incredibly efficient. You see, I approach design from an angle no one is expecting, and that drives innovation. Since my diagnosis, I've been inspired to share my experience with companies across the world, from Seattle to Scotland. It's so very important to me that this message of inclusivity is heard, because before, people around me didn't talk about mental health and getting the resources they needed to do their best work. But now they do. Over my years of speaking, I've been lifted up by colleagues, collaborated with other disabled folks, and found my voice and direction. I've been able to give companies specific advice on how to become more inclusive in their hiring practices, work environments, and team communication. I also explore topics like the discussion around soft skills and how neurodiversity is inherently intersectional, and examples of healthy culture and allyship. I use my diagnosis and identity as a catalyst to inspire change in organizations. I do this also so other people like me might have more psychological safety in their future. Autistic folks shouldn't have to disclose if they don't want to. and personal quirks should be accepted regardless of what a person knows or doesn't know about someone else's mental health. I've come to the conclusion that this is my mission, my niche. I am a late diagnosed female autistic product designer in tech. I have the platform to speak to the masses with my communities to promote healthy work environments through mental health as a lens. I leave leadership with actionable feedback, practices, and resources, and my mission is to make change in this world through neurodiversity in tech. And I'm positioning myself to be a cog in that engine now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We celebrate you. Let's give Amy a round of applause. Next, I'd like to welcome Gizelle Clemens, who shares her journey enduring medical racism while navigating her life and career. Studies show female patients and people of color are more likely to have their symptoms dismissed by medical providers, and Gizelle's story reflects on the hard work, physical and emotional, disabled people must do to get the care they need and deserve. Take it away, Gizelle.
Thank you, Emily. This is Gizelle Clemens speaking, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a Black woman with short Black curly hair, and I am wearing dark green glasses and a pearl necklace. I have on a cream-colored dress covered with multicolored leaves on it, and I have a basic Black blank wall behind me. We live in an ableist society, and it is killing us. Abolitionist educator and organizer T.L. Lewis defines ableism as a system of assigning values to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. If this is the first time you're hearing this, welcome. And know that I was you 2.5 years ago. Back then, I had a pretty good reputation of being an advocate for workplaces that would not exacerbate conditions that could lead to depression and anxiety. This was largely informed by my 10 years of experiencing how depression and anxiety impacted the way I showed up in the world and for myself for at least a decade, and I did not want others to experience the same. However, it wasn't until I started to craft this story that I realized that while I lived with invisible disabilities for years, I never used this term. I only referred to them as mental health issues. It took a physical health issue that resulted in an acquired physical disability, a spinal cord injury, for me to identify as someone with a disability. By not accepting that my invisible illnesses could also be disabilities, I could not make the connection to ableism, therefore failing to realize that I had internalized it. In 2019, I started to get sharp pains in my lower back. I went to see my primary care physician and she sent me to an orthopedist to get a CT scan. But by that time, I had been self-medicating and taking old painkillers, the kind that causes constipation. I was a few days shy of my 90-day probation of a very demanding job and could not afford to be in constant pain. So I sought out quick fix remedies until I could get a proper diagnosis and treatment. I was surprised to hear the diagnosis was constipation, but remembered that painkillers cause it. And perhaps it was something else. I followed up and was referred to a gynecologist to assess whether it was related to my menstrual cycle or possibly cysts. The ultrasound revealed that cysts were not the culprit. I was left at a standstill. And while the little voice in my head was telling me I should follow up, I was too distracted by a toxic work environment and navigating the aftermath of a complaint I filed against a member of the C-suite. I was afraid and feeling powerless, and my health issues were the furthest thing from my mind. I was frantically working to prove my value and relevance so that I could keep my job. I was the one harmed, but I also knew I was the one with the least amount of clout, privilege, and power in the situation. My mental health deteriorated and the pain intensified. I turned to more holistic approaches for my back pain, massages and acupuncture, which temporarily helped. But I knew I needed to address the back pain. 3 months later, the complaint was resolved, but I was still working with my abuser. And to manage, I was in therapy every week. Did I mention that I was also fighting for proper compensation for the work I was doing, being expected to do, and the skill set I walked in with that had been undervalued? Once this was finally resolved, partially unfavorably, I set my sights on leaving this environment, and then the pandemic hit. When the pandemic began, my massages and acupuncture treatments ended. I didn't make my physical health a priority because of the many issues women face in the workplace. We are in a constant battle with structural racism, sexism, ageism, and capitalism, which I would later learn are all rooted in ableism. And my desire to be seen as productive, desirable, intelligent, excellent in a toxic work environment, I compromised my health. I suffered and watched and felt as the pain grew. 7 months into the pandemic, when I felt safe enough to get around, I noticed my gait had changed. After about 10 minutes of walking, I would be in pain and start walking with a limp. As we started to go into the winter months, fear of another lockdown, and admittedly vanity, sent me feverishly looking for answers to what was going on in my body. Over the course of 4 weeks, I saw 5 different doctors with 4 different specialties between them, including a trip to Northwestern's emergency department, where I was discharged against my will after demanding an MRI. The 5th doctor, the neurologist, took less than 10 minutes to assess that there was something neurological going on. This Black woman gave me a script for an MRI and blood tests with a potential diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. That was my biggest fear as I went to get the MRI done 2 weeks later, only to find out it was something that scared me even more: cancer. The scans showed a tumor embedded in my spinal cord from T6 to T10. I was immediately admitted and scheduled for surgery 5 days later. We wouldn't know if it was cancerous until it was removed. I woke up from the almost 8-hour surgery paralyzed from the abdomen down on the left side of my body. I cannot remember if I cried. I imagine I did. But what my camera roll suggests from the time I spent in the hospital is that I was more concerned with having a record of who was caring for me during different shifts. I could not trust that the care I received wouldn't result in some kind of harm. The last 1.5 years had proven that I couldn't. And so I needed to keep my Aunt Carol, who was a nurse at the time, updated on every shift change. I have no pictures or documentation of myself after I was admitted. But this was the turning point for me. I was going to show up for myself fiercely and with authority. I was not powerless in this situation, and I would be radically present in my own healing. I had 8 months of disability and rehab to settle into this new practice that allowed me to progress to walking with a cane. But all that agency and power flew out of the window when I started a new job. I never disclosed my disability at my new job. I was afraid that it would be weaponized and worked to prove to no one but myself that I could perform at this level in my new body. I worked for 15 weeks straight and didn't take a single day off. I bragged about it as a badge of honor, leaving out the fact that I had compromised my mental health and neglected the day-to-day necessities to advance in my physical rehabilitation. Internalized ableism had won again. Think about how internalized ableism is ruling your life. Are you denying the fact that you have an invisible or physical disability? Are you enforcing policies that contribute to hostile work environments? Are you assigning values to your body and mind, or the bodies and minds of others, based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness? This is my clarion call for everyone to do things differently so that ableism does not kill us. We need to use the words ableism and anti-ableism in our language when describing what is happening to us. And its many solutions, which include recent movements focusing on rest as resistance and self-care. We are up against systems of oppression, and we cannot self-care ourselves out of it. Those in the disability justice space recognize this, and it is important that we ground these well-meaning practices in anti-ableism. I implore you to examine your relationship to disability in its many different forms, to better understand how this impacts your life. Keeping in mind that you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. This needs to be a societal problem that we all want to solve because it is killing us. I would love to help contribute to an inclusive anti-ableism movement. Let's start here. Let's start now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gizelle, for sharing your powerful story. We celebrate and applaud you. Next, Brittney Hyde will tell us about being a woman with a chronic illness, navigating high school, college, and now her career. Brittney talks about her journey toward understanding that she is, in fact, disabled, and further her uncertainty about stepping into that disability identity because she may not appear as disabled or quote-unquote disabled enough. These are feelings that many of us, especially those who have invisible or non-apparent disabilities, have wrestled with. Brittney, the floor is yours.
Hi, this is Brittney speaking. My name is Brittney Hyde. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with brown hair and wear glasses. I'm wearing a gold top today and am in my home office, which is also the basement in my home. My story is titled Disability, a Community. In my work, I often come across people who learn, sometimes in the very moment we're speaking, that a diagnosis they have is considered a disability. I can tell that this information has caught them by surprise, and I can feel their sense of unease, even through the phone or Zoom screen. They're often at a loss for words. Since our society has a negative outlook on disability, this isn't information people tend to welcome with open arms. It can be scary and confusing. Not that long ago, I was just like them. I didn't realize I was disabled either. It wasn't until I was 28 years old, when I was applying for new jobs, that I found my diagnosis on a list of disabilities on a self-identification of disability form. At first, I was shocked. How could I not know having Crohn's disease meant I was disabled? The doctor who told me my diagnosis certainly didn't help. I was 16 years old, sitting in a children's hospital, feeling out of place. I was used to being the visitor, not the patient. Not to mention all the things that made it clear this space was a space for children, something I felt I was not. I was old enough to understand the magnitude of the space, but young enough to want to feel the closeness of my parents where it was safe. I was scared. I was in so much pain and my body grew so weak that anytime I stood up, I lost consciousness. I was so confused. How did I get here? I was a typical healthy kid a few weeks ago. When the doctor came in, she abruptly told me I have Crohn's disease, a diagnosis I was close to before it was mine, a family member that had a really tough go of it. At that moment, I believed their experience to be what my future would look like. My mind became very busy and thoughts raced, but my body was too weak to keep up. Trying to put on a show for the adults around me, through the pain and the fatigue and now this, it was too much. When I broke down in tears, the doctor awkwardly dismissed herself. I just laid there, totally out of control of my own body, as the thoughts and questions continued to race and the fear magnified. I was due to be put under soon. An hour-long surgery led to a 3-month-long painful recovery. I had spent most of my time horizontal and needed help bathing. I missed 2 months of school and absolutely dreaded going back. The nature of my disease was embarrassing. The pain influenced my movement and made it obvious I was not well. Though I so badly longed for the community I had at school, I could not bear the idea of facing my classmates, their stares and their questions. I wondered if I would ever feel a part of that community again. From then on, I would do my best to hide this part of myself. If I turned down food at a restaurant, I let people comment it was because I was some sort of weight-conscious health nut, rather than the truth. Eating it would cause serious pain. I passed off the strange movement or occasional vocalizations due to pain as injury or bad genes, instead of what it was, arthritic pain in my joints that is the first sign of flaring. I wrote off lightheadedness as dehydration instead of admitting that it was due to internal bleeding and anemia. As I became healthier though, hiding grew easier, but flares were not predictable and caused disruption to my life and missing out on big life events. When that disruption affected others, I would find myself stuck. How do I explain that I am not in control of my inability to be present? This forced me to share my diagnosis with some people that I was close to, but with as little detail as possible and wishing that I didn't have to. While my peers were spending their first few days of college basking in their newfound freedom and socializing with others, I spent my first couple of days on campus in the Disability Service Office, giving information to strangers that I usually like to keep secret, and establishing care with a doctor who could treat me in an emergency. I could flare at any time. College and joining the workforce were hard on my body, but eventually I learned what I needed to do to take care of it. I became a master at detecting warning signs and how to better my chances of avoiding full-on flares. Once I gained a little more control, I gained a little more confidence. I experimented with telling people I worked closely with. It felt really good to share such a large part of who I am, but I hated the pity and the assumption of what the disease meant for me and my life, or the barriers that it could create. Eventually, I learned that if I shared this information with anyone who had any influence on the trajectory of my career, it could lead to eliminating opportunities for me. I worked for 6 years as a special education teacher and sponsor of several extracurricular activities. I advocated for disabled students, but I wasn't the best advocate for myself yet. I knew I was sick, but I didn't know I was disabled too. There were times of the year that demand and stress was so overwhelming to my body that it would cause a flare. After some time, I understood that this was cyclical and happened like clockwork. And as the years went on, the symptoms added up. I developed chronic pain and a new diagnosis I had to learn how to manage. I was unhealthy and unhappy. This, along with the pandemic, led to my decision to leave teaching. The decision to leave was tough. Although I had not planned on teaching after school, I had fallen in love with the community I built in my classroom. A space for students and staff alike where it was safe to be vulnerable with one another because doing so allowed us to connect and grow. A space I did not have while I was in high school. Now, since then, I've learned that I'm part of the disability community myself, but realizing I was disabled wasn't enough. I also had to learn that I deserved to own that identity. When I realized Crohn's disease was a disability, I quickly felt like an imposter. What would other people that I know with chronic illness think about me identifying as disabled? Or what would people who I know who are actually disabled think? Imposter syndrome is not a stranger to this community. We too battle forms of our own internalized ableism that has been influenced by stigma and misconception around disability. Our society harshly judges all facets of being human. If I don't fit the mold of what people consider disabled, do I get to belong? This is a toxic and exclusionary practice. I've learned that by discounting my own disability, I was discounting others. Embracing my disability identity has improved my work and my well-being. Through the disability community, I have learned different ways to disclose and tips for avoiding the awkward, pity-filled reaction on the other end of the conversation. By advocating for others, I learned the importance of advocating for myself. I have learned the importance of universal design and what I can do to create access for all in the spaces that I take up. I have learned and am learning about my own ableism and how to tackle it better to serve my community, but more importantly, how to better serve myself. I have learned about our worth and what we can bring to the table. I have been empowered by other disabled leaders who are part of this movement for change. I have met people from all walks of life, all races, sexual orientations, gender identities, classes, and disabilities. And with these people, I have found space where I don't have to feel vulnerable. I can come as my full self, and it's a beautiful space to be in, and I'm proud to be here. Now I connect disabled job seekers to career opportunities. I am privileged to be the person in that moment with them to welcome them to the disability community through providing them with information that they are disabled for the first time. I highlight why disabled folks make for amazing employees. Living in a world that's not set up for us, we are creative thinkers and problem solvers. For the first person they interact with to paint disability in a positive light can change the trajectory of their outlook and feeling towards it. What I hope is taken away from my sharing my story is that disability is a community and a pretty badass one at that. I hope sharing gives people permission to consider disability as a positive. Through acceptance of ourselves and our peers, we can band together and really change the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittney. We celebrate you. Let's give Brittney a round of applause. And finally, Kruti Shah. We end our event with an incredible story of innovation. There are so many stories of how people with disabilities have hacked products, living environments, and even society itself to ensure our inclusion. Kruti shares a powerful story of how the experience of her son's birth drove better access across an entire hospital system. Take it away, Kruti.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Hello, my name is Kruti Shah. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a South Asian woman with dark brown hair and wearing a red top with flowers with a blurred background. Here we go. It was December 2020, the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and the height of my labor pain from giving birth to my second baby. I was at one of the hospital systems in Chicago on labor and birthing unit with my OB team that included nurses, physicians, and other clinical staff. As I breathed through my contractions that were getting stronger and unbearably painful by the minute, each interaction with my OB team was getting more nerve-wracking, challenging, and frustrating. I had been through labor before with my first child. I knew what to expect. So why was my world falling apart this time, you might ask? Being hard of hearing was not new to me. I was 3 years old when I was first diagnosed with mild to moderate hearing loss. Then why was it exceptionally challenging this time? It's because there were barriers. We were in an unprecedented situation of being in the pandemic for which universal masking was extremely important. Although a measure of public safety, medical mask posed a huge barrier to lip reading, especially for those with hard of hearing and deaf community. Which is why I had to strain my nerve each time someone was communicating with me. I found myself constantly saying, "Can you please repeat that? Excuse me, say what again?" Date of birth sounded like weight at birth. Dilation sounded like violation. Pitocin sounded like blank scene. I was missing words or mishearing words and was extremely aggravating, confusing, and embarrassing. There were times when the medical staff directly communicated with my husband, even though I was lying in front of them in the hospital bed. To be sure, their intention was to have a quick and efficient conversation, but it still left me feeling small and ignored. I take pride in my knowledge of medicine and value my independence as a pharmacist. But this situation left me feeling insignificant. Not only that, but I had to deal with attitudinal barriers. For instance, when I was in the postpartum mother-baby unit with my daughter by my side, a nurse came close to me and said, "Congratulations on your daughter. I must say you are a brave woman to want to have children despite your hearing loss." She did not realize that this was not a compliment, that her statement was rooted in bias and assumption that people with hearing impairment or with any kind of disability for that matter cannot be good parents. So what was I expecting? That the medical team would remove masks or allow for lip reading? Oh, absolutely not. Public safety is high priority for me, and it is a communal responsibility to keep each other safe. Would I have had clearer communication if the individual speaking were standing right next to me? Yes. However, due to social distancing practices, that would have jeopardized public safety. All I really wished for were clear masks so I could lip read, so I could have communication access. However, when I inquired about clear masks, I was told the hospital system did not carry them. Granted, we were still pretty early on in the pandemic. However, it was frustrating. It was unfair. It felt as though the burden of access fell on me as a person with a disability, despite the so-called mission of our healthcare to ensure accessible and equitable care to all. This difficult experience as a patient gave me insight into our inaccessible healthcare system. Ironically, I am an integral member of this very healthcare system, serving as a clinical operations pharmacist at that hospital. In my role, I solve medication-related problems and provide safe and effective treatment. I participate in medical rounds discussing best therapeutic options for our patients. I felt fulfilled in being an essential healthcare professional during the pandemic to provide pharmaceutical care for our very sick COVID patients in that hospital. However, I found myself struck by the same challenge of communication because of masking, due to which I had to work 10 times harder than before to catch what my colleagues were saying, giving me hearing fatigue at the end of the day. Not only that, I felt I was at a huge disadvantage in compared to my hearing peers because of barriers. Therefore, I felt like I was hitting rock bottom. I was feeling lonely. There was moments of darkness and despair. I was internalizing shame, guilt, and self-doubt. In that moment, I thought of Helen Keller, who lost her sight and hearing at a young age, yet turned her adversity to advocate for disability rights in the 1900s. She said, "We could never learn to be brave and patient if there were only joy in the world." It was because of this crisis that I felt the need, the commitment to channel my energy to finding a solution to make communications accessible, both as a healthcare worker and as a patient. But this process was transformational, required revolutionary transformation on many levels. Two major roadblocks had to be overcome. First was internal, being vulnerable and embracing my disability. This was the toughest for me. Being raised in a culture where stigma and prejudice associated with disabilities is detrimental, and the mindset is that it can have a negative impact on one's confidence and dignity. I did not feel comfortable disclosing my non-apparent disability. With the fear of being judged and honestly, my own internal ableism, I hid my disability, covered my hearing aids with my long hair. I was successful in doing so. However, that came with the cost of misunderstandings, inauthenticity, and lack of access to accommodation. Therefore, that mindset had to shift to recognize that disability is not a weakness, it is a strength. Disabled individuals live in a society that is not made for them, which is why they're often trailblazers, problem solvers, hardworking, and resilient. And as Judy Heumann, the mother of disability, writes that disability only becomes a tragedy when society fails to provide the things we need to lead our lives. The second step for this transformation was finding a community. Through Disability Employee Resource Group, for the first time, I felt that I was not alone, that there was judgment-free and safe space. It was empowering. I was in a community of powerful and influential disabled people with diverse disabilities. Together, they inspired me to spearhead advocacy efforts to acquire clear masks for the hospital. I reached out to senior leadership, ADA task force, patient access team of the hospital, and even after encountering pushbacks due to high cost and environmental safety and availability, I kept moving forward. Not taking a no for an answer, we showed resilience, and our hospital finally acquired clear masks after 10 months of COVID. And this was a game changer. Once my colleagues placed them on, I could read their lips. I could understand them. I felt included, valued, respected. Not only that, but many patients and employees benefited from them. Notably, even teachers at a daycare center that was affiliated with the healthcare system started using them when interacting with their young children at the school. And the head of the daycare program reported that within just 1 week, they noticed stark difference in children's eye contacts, smile, and social interactions with each other. This is the beauty of universal design. Clear masks, captions, voice-activated features on your phone, elevators, ramps are all designed for those with disabilities, but benefit so many people. Not only that, but embracing my disability and advocating for those with disability at the hospital created a culture of inclusion and wellness, where every individual felt comfortable being who they were and leading with their identity, which is why our department was recently awarded a Quality Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion initiatives. In essence, personally, the last 3 years were very difficult, as they threw multiple challenges at me, but I learned to get up on my feet with the power of vulnerability, solidarity, and disability advocacy. Back to the moment of being at the mother and baby unit with my daughter in the crib next to me. After my daughter was born, I was looking at her and I was admiring her soft skin and her beautiful eyes. And I promised her to be a parent who will normalize disability as a natural part of human existence. I promised her that I will stand by her and break any barriers she may have to face as she goes out in the world. So let's all stand together, shoulder to shoulder. Let's celebrate our differences. Let's find our voices, and let's lead with our disability or our identity with courage, with conviction, with compassion. And let us join Amanda Gorman, a young Black poet who stood in front of the entire nation during the presidential inauguration in 2021 and said, "For there is light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." Thank you.
Thank you, Kruti. We celebrate you. And really, we celebrate everyone. Kruti, Amy, Gizelle, Brittney, you all are so deserving of a round of applause. As I close this out, I want to thank all of you again for joining us today. You've just heard 4 wonderful and beautiful stories, yet we know there are millions more out there. And people with disabilities come from all backgrounds, races, ethnicities, genders, income levels, and family histories. We encourage all of you to continue to seek these stories out. And because we just can't help ourselves, we got a few suggestions coming your way in a follow-up email, including a recently launched website by our very own Amy Johnson. We also encourage you to connect with us. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and our website is disabilitylead.org. And if you are a person with a disability who is interested in leading in the Chicago region, please apply for our annual institute. Applications are now open for the 2024 session. We also accept applications for membership year-round. So visit disabilitylead.org/apply for more information. To close out our time together, I quickly want to share with all of you the story of the first time I met a leader with a disability and the profound impact it had on me. During my junior year in college, a few years after the ADA was passed, I spent a semester in Washington, D.C., and I participated in a program that matched classroom learning with an internship program. I landed an internship at Common Cause, and for the most part, everything about the work was so unremarkable. It was your typical make copies, get coffee, help prep for upcoming meetings type of work, and honestly, I wouldn't remember any of it if it weren't for a senior leader in the organization. This leader was a total badass and a person with a visible disability, and quite frankly, my mind was blown. It was in fact the first time I had encountered a person with a disability in a professional, non-medical setting. I saw this woman lead teams and conversations. I saw her come and go from meetings on Capitol Hill, where she led the organization's efforts to root out special interest influence. She had a big job. So the truth is, we didn't really speak much, nor did we interact. Yet at the same time, she was a mentor and a role model. To me, she embodied what I wanted to be, a woman with a disability who had power and influence. I like to think that more than 30 years later, she would be glad to know where I am, that I'm also a woman with a disability who's unapologetic, focused, and determined. And like her, I'm doing the work that has impact. I'm not alone. 33 years after the passage of the ADA, the number of people with disabilities in the workforce commanding attention for our skills and ideas and making change has grown exponentially. It's exciting to think about what the next 3 decades will bring, the disabled leaders who will help us get there, and the stories we will be able to tell about it. Thank you and have a good evening.